present the model of contemplative education, as we begin to call ourselves, Contemplative Education University from Naropa University, and to share with you the findings of a community. I'm really not speaking here as an individual scholar. I am really in quite a different situation than Hal and Lewis, in that I'm part of a larger community of contemplative educators. We work in a very collaborative manner. There's a lot of differences of view and disagreements, but there's no disagreement about the direction that we're going as contemplative educators. So I think that one of the questions would be, what would Naropa University, that has had such a unique history and environment, have to share with the field of contemplative studies? And so what I would like to do is talk about that history, talk about how we at Naropa University have evolved over now 43 years to become a fully contemplative university. So I want to thank Brown University so much, and Hal especially, and also Anne, for making this event happen. It is truly historic, in particular because I go to a lot of different contemplative education conferences, and very often some of you are at one group, and some of you are at another, and some of you are at another, but there's a kind of gathering here of thought leaders in contemplative studies that I haven't seen quite in a full configuration the way that I do see here, and it's a tremendous opportunity for us to all learn from each other and talk with each other about the direction that our field is taking. So Naropa's uniqueness is an entirely contemplative university, at least we are aspiring that way. That is, we as a university place ourselves firmly as contemplative as the foundation out of which we come, and we really look at a variety of other priorities of the university through a contemplative lens. That contemplative lens is a multifaceted lens in many ways, that is beginning as a Buddhist university, Buddhist-inspired university, and then evolving into a contemplative university. So for those of you who don't know, Naropa is now 43 years old, located on 3 campuses in Boulder, Colorado. We have 1,000 students, roughly 450 undergrads, and 550 graduate students. We have 90 core faculty members and a very large group of adjunct faculty members as well. And I've listed here the degrees that we grant. So we're very specialized in certain ways, but we cover some fields quite fully, just to give you a sense of where we are. I'd like to talk about Naropa's development as a contemplative university in 3 phases. This is entirely my own. I haven't shared this with my colleagues at Naropa, and my friend Carol is here, and she'll have to weigh in on whether she agrees with these 3 phases. I'm a founding faculty member at Naropa. I've now been at Naropa for 40 years, so I have been there for these phases, and I did attend the very first summer of Naropa as well, which is where I met Mirabai for the first time, and then came back 3 years later as a full-time faculty member. So I have been at Naropa through a lot of development, and I'm really trying to narrate here a story of our development as a contemplative university, and for each phase, sharing discoveries. That is the kind of consensus we developed about certain aspects of contemplative education, and raising certain questions that we have found over this time. And some of those questions remain unanswered in our 43-year history. So the first phase, the founding of contemplative higher education, 1974 to 1986, this is a video that's currently on our website called The History of Naropa. And it starts with the opening talk that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche gave at the founding of Naropa. It starts with just a clip from this talk, which I was there that evening when he opened Naropa as a At that point, it was called Institute, but as an institute of higher education, and this is his vision for changing American higher education, and I'll comment on it.
Something is not quite right. It doesn't complete. There's enormous energy, of course. Fantastic energy. But something doesn't click. That's as if we missed the pilot light. While the stove is burning. We could reignite our pilot light by respecting, trusting, acknowledging the tradition that we have already grown up, whether it is the nature of Eastern or that of the Western. It does not really matter.
In typical daring fashion, Naropa started with a lot of inspiration and the mixture of so many energies. Cutting-edge thinkers in the arts, sciences, spirituality, writing, and music. The first Summer Institute in 1974, held in an old bus depot that's now the site of Alfalfa Supermarket, hoped to attract a few hundred people. Instead, more than 2,000 attended, an unmistakable signal that Naropa was an idea whose time had come.
First Summer was a leap into the unknown. Naropa's founder, the Tibetan Buddhist scholar Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who had been teaching at the University of Colorado, had this strong desire to invite artists, academics, writers and poets, religious teachers to come to Boulder to basically come together in community.
Naropa brought luminaries such as spiritual teacher Ram Dass, poets Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, and Philip Whalen, anthropologists like Gregory Bateson, musicians John Cage and Jerry Granelli, religious studies scholar Reggie Ray, physicist Jeremy Hayward, and the list goes on. During that first summer session, Trungpa Rinpoche asked Anne Waldman, Allen Ginsberg, and Diane DePrima to create what would eventually become the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. Ginsberg described it as a way of educating poets about sanity, of teaching meditators about the golden mouth, and poets about the golden mind. The artist practitioner was powerfully evident in Naropa's early days. Trungpa Rinpoche very much saw the power of the arts in the relationship with artistic creativity and meditative awareness, and was intent on bringing that together.
He laid out very clearly a meditative awareness journey through the arts. That art practice itself was our way into mindfulness and attention and awareness and skillful means and generosity and all the values of the traditional Vajrayana Buddhist path were available to us through the disciplines of the arts.
By the late 1970s, Naropa was shifting from a festive summer environment to a credible year-round institution. From this humble beginning, Naropa became the first Western university to bring contemplative tools and techniques into a secular classroom, and academic programs like religious studies, psychology, and music flourished. Judy Leaf was named as the first dean of Naropa in 1980 and helped establish Naropa as the birthplace of contemplative education.
If we are willing to work with ourselves, we can be of benefit to our fellow beings. The basis of training in Naropa is that when we look at ourselves, we begin to cut through preconceptions of what we might like to be, and we become willing to relate to who we really are.
By the mid-1980s, nearly 1,000 students were enrolled in 200 courses and workshops, and a rapidly expanding number of academic programs. The school was on its way to accreditation, financial stability, and a permanent home. Not long after Barbara Dilley succeeded Judy Leaf as Naropa's next leader, Naropa received accreditation.
I think there's a feeling of being grounded and being, having put our feet on the ground in America. So it meant that there were many more students who would aspire to be here who could receive the grants and the funding to do that.
Education, in the true sense, is not just about acquiring information and or skills or a job, but it's about powerful transformation in which people leave an institution at a level where they're at ease with themselves, they know who they are, and they are inspired to take that into the world and make a difference.
So this began phase one of Naropa. Rinpoche began Naropa by talking about the pilot light of American education, which he said had gone out. While the stove is still burning, there's a lot going on, but there's the pilot light of wisdom had been lost. And so he declared at the opening of Naropa that he wanted to relight the pilot light of American education. And that has been a kind of slogan for us, of trying to identify what is that pilot light and how to relight it. Naropa was started with a loan of $2,000, no money, and for at least the first probably 8 years, that was where things were. And so we built things up from the ground up. I joined the faculty in 1977. I attended Naropa the first summer, but I was teaching elsewhere in Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington. But I was so captured by the dream of what Naropa was that I was delighted to apply, and then was drafted on very short notice to go teach at Naropa in 1977. The very beginning of Naropa was really invoking the model of Nalanda University in India. And Rinpoche, just as many Tibetans, see Nalanda as the model of what a university is. So at the very beginning, we had a lot of Nalanda-type names around, naming buildings and organizations and committees of various kinds. But the idea of liberal education as it developed at Nalanda at a very early time began to be a guiding principle, particularly for our first phase. We were always going back and reading things about Nalanda history and its curriculum. There are still lots of ways in which Naropa's curriculum really you can still see is modeling the 5 vidyas of Nalanda's curriculum, which shaped education in Tibet a great deal. But Rinpoche did not want Naropa to be a Dharma center. He really wanted it to be a university where East and West could come together and the sparks will fly. And he wanted very much Western academic disciplines and Asian ones to come together in a kind of creative meeting. He was very clear that he did not want us to be expecting anyone to hold Buddhism as a tradition that they practiced. There was a sense that, yes, he wanted everyone to meditate, but that it was not a Buddhist institution, it was a Buddhist-inspired institution. There was a lot of emphasis on spiritual disciplines from the very beginning. Initially, Naropa was just a whole group of classes, and it gradually came together into departments. But he put a lot of emphasis on inviting spiritual teachers from a variety of lineages together, and he put a lot of emphasis on interreligious dialogue. After about 1983 or 84, Rinpoche was really not very involved with Naropa in a direct way. He would come back and give talks. He was very involved in those first years in the vision of what he really saw it to be. And so he appointed Judy Leaf, the dean of Naropa, and it was basically in our hands to really figure out what we were doing, what it meant to relight the pilot light of American education. So you can see the way I looked there down on the left-hand corner. Those were interesting days because until we actually had developed a more permanent campus, I had my office in a booth in the New York deli for 4 years. And the owner of the deli was a member of the Shambhala community who gave me a discount card, and I would just buy cups of coffee and invite students to come in and meet with me because we really did not have facilities for the first years that I was there. So how did it work in the classroom? We faculty got together and began to experiment with how our practice, and most of us at the beginning were Rinpoche students, although there was always a small group of faculty who were not. And we had a lot of work together. What would it look like to bring some kind of contemplative approach to our disciplines? What would practice look like? What would readings look like? What would assignments look like? We started a meditation practicum series in 1979 that continues in a slightly different form to today. We developed in the various disciplines what we now call heritage practices, but things that we hatched, often asking Rinpoche questions about what did he think about this, but more often relying on each other. And these became foundational practices. Naropa was very dominated by the arts in those early years. Then in 1983, we moved from a storefront situation to a campus and a dedicated meditation hall in 1983, a hall that is never scheduled for anything but meditation practice. There are a lot of different kinds of practice that happen in this room, and it started out as a kind of generic Buddhist meditation space. It continues with a strong Buddhist atmosphere, but it's pretty toned down in imagery and such. It looks more generic than anything else. Barbara Dilley, while she was president of Naropa 1984 to 93, was the time when we really were going through trying to articulate what we were doing and how. And she came up with this title, A Contemplative College of the Liberal Arts. And she became interested in this word contemplation with conversations with members of our accreditation teams who were fascinated with what we were doing and also fascinated with our inability to describe it, and they wanted to help us. So that was a lovely journey as well. So we became fully accredited in 1986, and that was a big shift for us. So the method of learning during this phase one, we articulated a great deal in terms of the three prajnas or prajnas of Buddhism: hearing, contemplating, and meditating. Hearing having to do with studying with an open mind, contemplating with reflecting and relating to one's own inner experience, and meditating, making the learning one's own. This still is a very persuasive model, although many complain that it's way too Buddhist. So the more sort of Buddhist-leaning departments at Naropa, sometimes viewed chauvinistic by other departments, use this particular model. It's still a very powerful model that we use at Naropa as a way to describe the three phases of contemplative learning. So conclusions from phase one. This developed, and this is my memory of the consensus we developed, and I'm not sure everybody would agree, but actually I'm the last of the founding faculty still working full-time at Naropa, so they're not around to challenge me on this, I guess. The first one is you cannot be a contemplative professor without being trained in contemplative practice and continuing to practice. First one. Second one, lineage is important. Contemplative is not a made-up thing. We need to be trained in an authentic lineage associated with an ancient tradition. And we had committee meetings as courses would come forward as candidates for fulfilling the contemplative requirements at Naropa, and we developed criteria for what makes up an authentic contemplative course. This was back in the 80s. Very interesting conversations as we struggled to try to articulate for ourselves. We have all of this documentation. And contemplative education is not religious, making a really, really clear separation from a Dharma center approach or a religious school approach, understanding what a contemplative approach might be in a broad way, not based in just one tradition, which required a lot of deconstructing what Buddhism had been for us. Also, I think one of the themes was joining theory and practice in every class. So especially in those days, a curriculum committee decision would be made based on whether you have theory and practice in the class. Some kind of theory and application, and courses that had one or the other would not be considered acceptable courses. The arts have always been privileged at Naropa, and as you notice, the video is heavily arts-based. The arts influence remains. We worry as we grow and develop, the arts have become less central, and we're really trying to keep them central because of the incredible role they've played in helping us articulate our understanding of contemplative education. And the questions from phase one is, what is the difference between a Buddhist university and a non-sectarian university? What is a Buddhist-inspired university? This is the terminology we were using a lot in those days. Also, contemplative education, how do we articulate this? A lot of conversation throughout our history about the role of embodiment. How do we speak about insight and intuition? Contemplative learning expressed in these ways. We began to, a little bit later, bring in Lectio Divina and such as another model of talking about the three prajnas and ways that we could make it a little less Buddhist. And also, did we have anything to say or to share outside? Naropas tended to be insular, partially geographically, partially because of the training and orientation of our faculty, that we've tended to spend a lot of time together and not go out so much. And I was always an exception in that way, so I've sort of ended up a de facto spokesperson for a lot of things that we do. Are we alternative? Are we innovators? Are we wannabes? And we had a lot of questions at this point, and I was able to go back into my own archives and find a lot of documentation of these kinds of considerations from phase one. So phase two, from our accreditation in 1986 to 2006, and this was an incredibly formative 20 years. Consider that at this point, nobody else was really doing this in higher education. We were doing it, and no one else that we knew, and more I'm learning about other places, it wasn't really happening yet. So this was a time of our developing strength and resilience as a university. We certainly have had times that we could have closed, and especially in phase one. Since 1987, we've used contemplative education, and the word contemplative gets beaten to death, it's used so much. We developed our own definitions in all of our departments of what is contemplative religions, etc. How do we understand that term? How does it govern our curricula? And how does it govern the overall mission of the university? John Cobb, our president from 1993 to 2003, grew Naropa in lots and lots of ways, developing more facilities as we grew. We began to get a much larger student body, bringing in contemplative dimensions like practice day. Every semester, the entire university stops and we practice together for the 8th Tuesday of the semester. This has been going on since about 1995. As people began to come and see us and write about us, and so I was able to find some old articles about Naropa, about how we defined ourselves as non-sectarian in those days, and all of that is really interesting. So it was a period of steady growth and diversification with additional facilities because we had outgrown our facilities, developed a bunch more places, eventually actually ended up developing 3 campuses because it's very difficult for us to get enough real estate in central Boulder. And our first dormitory, for example. So this was also a time of tremendous growth of our core faculty body and strengthening faculty governance, really having a stronger sense of faculty focus on what we were doing. So in 1994, the Board of Trustees developed this description of Naropa's contemplative education mission, focusing on cultivation of awareness of the present moment, for example, through intellectual, artistic, and meditative disciplines, fostering a learning community that uncovers wisdom and heart, cultivating openness and communication, sharpening critical intellect, talking about Naropa's Buddhist educational heritage, and encouraging the integration of world wisdom traditions and modern culture, and offer non-sectarian community open to all. So this 1994 was, again, our previous mission statement was about 5 paragraphs long, so it sort of got it down to some bullet points that was very helpful. We also developed the World Wisdom Chair position at Naropa, bringing in spiritual teachers who are also academics to help guide us in becoming more open and not so confined to our Tibetan Buddhist heritage. And this was a very rich period with this kind of guidance. We became a university in 1999, and at that point, around 1995, we had a full 4-year college program, sort of cobbled together, and then the graduate school, and then as things got a little more together, we became a university with a 4-year undergraduate college and then the graduate schools. With 2 campuses and enrollment over 1,000, later, not long after that, we added a 3rd campus. This was a period of some backlash against our Buddhist heritage, where there was a sense that if you were connected with Buddhism or Shambhala Buddhism in particular, and that was a healthy part of our growth. So we developed more contemplative infrastructure during this time of bringing contemplative practices and pedagogies into all of our departments and a greater articulation of what contemplative really means. We also began to talk about contemplative administration, and we developed more thorough criteria for contemplative, for promotion in rank. Faculty have to demonstrate their contemplative depth and development. So this is an interesting thing when you apply for promotion. You include the retreat training you've had, the various kinds of ways that you have pursued contemplative development. And faculty development monies are used to support contemplative development. That has been true for decades and continues to be true at Naropa. A real landmark event for us was in 1997, the Spirituality and Education Conference. 800 people there. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was one of the keynote speakers, but there were some marvelous people, and Diana Chapman Walsh, who was there after attending our conference, went back and really got a lot of things going in the Northeast around a lot of discussion about spirituality in higher education. The proceedings of this conference went into a book, and we suddenly realized we weren't the only ones on the planet talking about these things. So we began to get more involved in going out and sharing what we were doing with contemplative education, with Mind and Life, with C-Mind, with academic conferences. We began to attract faculty who could bring more science and research into our faculty. And we began to partner with other academic institutions. So at this point, our core contemplative requirements, we have undergraduate requirements. Part of the core requirements for being a Naropa BA graduate is fulfilling a contemplative requirement. And then the graduate programs each have individual graduate requirements. So things like a month-long retreat required for graduation, a meditation course every semester, contemplative arts practice, various kinds of ways that people can fulfill their contemplative requirements. And this doesn't just mean Buddhist practice. It can be, going to a yoga retreat. It can be going to Snowmass Abbey up in the mountains and do a centering prayer retreat, Tai Chi camp. There are lots of ways that students can fulfill these various requirements. We have moving and stillness contemplative practice, contemplative brush, ikebana. There's a tremendous range of things that we have offered for many years, and these became much more firmed up during this phase 2. So, conclusions from phase 2. Aspiring to bring contemplative dimensions into every aspect of the university community and really asking what that has meant. Asking for contemplative rigor to be demonstrated in our courses, not just academic rigor, and really the sense that contemplative doesn't mean fluffy and value added, but that it's core to what we mean in terms of excellence for our students. Contemplative education means contemplative pedagogies, but also readings, assignments, and criteria for evaluation and grading. So we've worked on this. This work continues. It's not universal across the university, but this kind of work, it's not sitting for 5 minutes and then business as usual. What does it mean to really develop contemplative curriculum? Means more than just contemplative practice. And it's the reason why the contemplative studies language, often just about contemplative practice, isn't sufficient to cover the kind of transformation we are interested in at Naropa. Cultural and religious pluralism has to be at the heart of contemplative education. And the purpose of contemplative education is to empower students to, this is from our mission statement, our current mission statement, to see the world as it is and change it for the better. So it's a slogan that we have used a great deal. It translates often into transform yourself, transform the world. So the questions from phase 2 still remain. How does Naropa grow and retain its original magic and inspiration? How do we evaluate and grade in contemplative courses? What are the qualifications for a contemplative professor? And having deep contemplative training and then academic training, that's great, but we find that there are the closet practitioners who are PhDs in their field with teaching experience, and they come and their first couple of years are really rough, because learning how to bring those together in a way that really works in the classroom is not something that comes naturally. So we work these days very hard on mentoring people on ways that they could actually do that. It's often very rough if you've been a closet meditator for a long time and suddenly you're in a Naropa environment. You think you're really cool until you begin to realize you don't know how to talk about this in an appropriate way in a secular academic institution. And contemplative administration is still a work in progress. Also, faculty governance in a contemplative way. So these are our questions that we continue to work with and have shaped very much phase 3 of our development. So this is as we have more clearly and intentionally developed contemplative as the jewel of what we have to offer. This was under the leadership of Tom Coburn at first, who was our president from 2003 to 2009, and he brought a broader academic view to everything we were doing at Naropa. And he is the one who helped us develop the Center for the Advancement of Contemplative Education for a period of time in the 2000s. He also put a lot of emphasis on expanding the core faculty and on strengthening our BA curriculum. We had a pilot version of our center from 2006 to 2009, funded by the Lens Foundation, and it gave us our first contemplative studies course, which is a required course for undergraduates, Core 130, which is an introduction to contemplative learning, really brings students into what does it mean to learn in a contemplative way that's different from the way people have learned in high school or at previous college experience. So this course has been running now for 10 years, maybe 11 years. And it involves a variety of our heritage practices, but also looking at what does it mean to learn in a contemplative way. We also, for a period of 3 years, ran summer pedagogy workshops for faculty from a variety of institutions to really immerse themselves in a contemplative pedagogy environment. And those 3 years, they birthed 3 books and lots of articles from the participants. We made a lot of friends that way. My book, Meditation in the Classroom, came out in 2010. It's particularly addressing religious studies, and some of my friends here I got to know well during the time of working on that book and publishing it. Hal and I became close friends after that as I worked through an article that was pretty intense and softened it a little bit to make it a little more accessible for people who may have been put off by his anger at the Academy for its treatment of contemplative studies from his own experience here at Brown. So we also began talking more about 3 modes of inquiry during that period of time. So the present is really a continuation of phase 3. And I'd like to talk a little bit, this is a kind of golden era for Naropa in lots of ways in terms of leadership. Our president, Chuck Leaf, was a student of the founder of Naropa, and even though he has not been in education, his connection with Naropa's mission has been very helpful as he has promoted and raised money for us. Our provost, Janet Kramer, comes from a Christian contemplative background and has been a marvelous leader through some of the bumps in the road in being a small liberal arts college in a time when small liberal arts colleges are really challenged in lots and lots of ways. And I'm sure any of you from small liberal arts colleges know this. The chair of our board, Jerry Colonna, is an incredibly strong supporter and ally with our mission. We have a wonderful board. Carolyn Jacobs is on our board, for which I'm grateful every single day. Her guidance and her support has been unbelievable. So it's a wonderful time for us in many ways. Our annual budget is now $25 million a year. The challenge, of course, is how to keep all of this going, and we have the challenge of generation change, that the founding faculty of Naropa, like myself, are retiring and leaving, and how do we keep our contemplative mission strong in the midst of change? So we reestablished the Center for the Advancement of Contemplative Education in 2014 and are working very hard on how do we continue our legacy, how do we continue to grow with changing issues and changing times. We have lots of activity going. Charlotte Rotterdam is a phenomenon. She is the director of CASE, and her assistant, my assistant, is Carla Marie Burns, who's also really amazing. We have a wonderful advisory board for CASE, who each of them have a different kind of connection with Naropa and have helped us with the variety of challenges we have going ahead. So I wanted to share with you one example of challenges. In 2014, we had been working with diversity issues at Naropa for probably 10 years, very actively, lots of workshops and really looking at our syllabi and really trying to become a little more aware of how white privilege worked at Naropa. And intellectually, we were doing fine, but we really didn't get it. In the spring of 2014, a group of our students, some transgender students, some students of color, set up camp on the green of Naropa and said, we are not leaving until you meet our demands. And of course, many universities in that case would just sort of manage the crisis and hope the end of the semester would come and then it would all go away. And of course, this is very much in the Black Lives Matter environment, if you remember what 2014 was like. So for us as a university, and particularly for us as faculty, we thought maybe we were doing a good job, but when we began to sit with our students on the green and really listen to them, we really learned that we didn't get it, and that we had a long way to go before we understood how profoundly white privilege permeates the contemplative education environment at Naropa. And it was quite an experience for us as a faculty, as a whole, to say, oh, every one of these demands is reasonable, not only reasonable, but overdue. And so we wrote a letter and said, we agree, you're totally right. We have a long way to go, and we, as a faculty, are committed to growing and learning about white privilege and to begin to address the structures at Naropa that really are blind to white privilege. And this this is an example to me of a contemplative university, rather than reacting in merely a political way, really understanding the growth that we had to do and are still having to do. So we, as a faculty, Carol and I were in the small group that wrote the letter to the students, made a commitment to become students of our students and students of our faculty of color to learn more about how all of this has worked. On the left, you see Carla Sherrill, who's one of my academic colleagues, from whom I've learned an enormous amount about structural spiritual bypassing. We began to really understand how spiritual bypassing had meant that we as a university were saying, you know, if you've got a problem, just sit a lot, or, you know, do your contemplative practice. And this is something that has been very current for us. So as we have gotten more involved, our Center for the Advancement of Contemplative Education has been working intimately with the Diversity Inclusivity Faculty Committee, and we have worked as a single committee for the last 2 years, really beginning to understand the importance of opening up to the inseparability of contemplative practice and social engagement. And this has been incredibly helpful to us on lots and lots of levels in order to continue to grow individually and as a university. We're also working increasingly with climate justice issues as well. So this is a part of very current issues and very heart issues for us as faculty and as a university. Our current case projects are working with ongoing faculty mentoring, really looking at the next generation of faculty, how to bring them in, how to mentor them. Also being more proactive about connecting with scientists on our faculty and bringing in visiting scientists as well. And this has really strengthened our contemplative studies approach. We also have developed the Rocky Mountain Dialogue, which is a regional conversation once a year now, and this is its 5th year. We've had our 4th year, but we're now just heading into our 5th meeting with University of Colorado, Colorado State, University of Colorado, Northern Colorado, and I think there's another 6 or 8 institutions who have taken part, where we get together with them. Again, contemplative education can only work as a collaborative discipline. We also have developed a compassion initiative where we are working with a compassion training for undergrads, an 8-week public training, and a 5-day intensive retreat. We are studying our compassion training to find out more about the results that it brings, and are hoping to be able to do much more in the area of research on compassion. And this is something that I personally have been putting energy into. Also, we've been collaborating with C-Mind, and there was a 2-year collaboration with Dan Barbazad and Rhonda McGee that produced a conference at Naropa in 2015 that really began to look at what can contemplative education offer the larger world of higher education and offer the world of tremendous pain. What things does contemplative education offer? And we identified especially the role of college, student loan debt, white privilege, and online education issues. So that's been important. Through all this, Carol Clements, who's here with us as Dean of the college, has led the college in developing a curricular arc through phases that really identifies what a Naropa contemplative education includes. And this is a beautiful list of the variety of ways that we're getting out of a merely sort of narrow, head-oriented intellectual approach to a more holistic, more embodied approach that embraces multiple modes of inquiry. And this has been incredibly important in the development of our undergraduate curriculum. She also has been very helpful in shaping our living learning community at Naropa as well, dorm-based programs to really bring a greater sense of integration of student life and contemplative practice for students. So we're very excited about this and are looking into the possibility of a contemplative studies major. So the conclusions from phase 3: the importance of joining contemplative pedagogy with social engagement. Very much a theme, understanding that contemplative education and social engagement are not separate things, but they're very connected to each other. That transform yourself, transform the world makes perfect sense. That we are always connected with others, and we're not having our students, and we are not individually going into a cave in order to transform. That transformation is a community and global situation. Compassion training as a core Naropa pedagogy. About 3 years ago, we polled Naropa faculty to ask how many of you are teaching compassion in your courses. We got 90 syllabi. And so I pulled together a group of 12 faculty who were teaching standalone compassion classes. We began to work together to identify what's common between our various syllabi. We have a Kempo from Nepal who has been with us for 10 years, and he was separately approached by Thupten Jimpa from, well, of course at that point he was still at Stanford, and Lobsang Negi from Emory, and they had approached him and said, what is Naropa's compassion training? And Lama Tempa said to me, we have to develop our own compassion training. So in the process of this, we really identified the core things that have come through the lineages that we hold are somewhat different from the compassion trainings that you find at Emory and Stanford. Much more heart-centered, much more intuitive, much more embodied, and we've been doing this compassion training now into the 3rd year and are beginning to find that there is some incredible resonance, not only with our students, but in our larger community. So we're doing research on this and are hoping to have our compassion training online by next year. We're also finding lots of scientists. We have meditators at Naropa, lots of them, 1,000 at the current time. And sometimes scientists are having a hard time finding people who practice for a while. So there are more and more scientists interested in coming and working with us, especially Amishi is really keen to work with Naropa. We've started collaborating with her on some of the research. That's Amishi Jha from University of Miami. We're finding there are many more prospective Naropa faculty who have just the qualifications we're looking for. We have a much easier time recruiting faculty than we had 10 years ago, and it's quite exciting. We also find that there are so many yoga students now. There's just lots and lots of, and more Sanskrit students than ever. We've always been heavier on Tibetan and lighter on Sanskrit. Boy, our Sanskrit classes are huge, and they're not dropping out. It's really exciting. So questions from phase 3. What are the most effective contemplative pedagogies for traditional intellectual disciplines? A lot of our faculty do well, perhaps, with psychology or the arts, but how about for humanities research and that kind of thing? How do we really prepare our students to transform the world? How do we cope gracefully with the generation change of our founding faculty? And what is the best way to mentor new faculty? What aspects of contemplative studies are most appropriate for a Naropa environment? And especially on the undergraduate level, how can we increase our enrollment? At a time when private colleges are really challenged, Naropa is also challenged. And we have always been lean as an institution. We don't have the big endowments that a lot of other schools have. So when our enrollment dips, we pay attention. And so we're working very hard now to identify ways to increase our enrollments, especially for the undergraduate program. So for the future, I just thought I would show you some photographs from our Naropa world, our students and faculty in the classroom, contemplative learning, contemplative reading and writing, We continue to be very strong in the arts, and the contemplative arts are a beautiful, always photogenic part of Naropa. Boy, the photographers love the arts classes. They're just great to photograph. We have lots of contemplative mentors from a variety of religious traditions, Christian, Jewish, various branches of Buddhism and Hinduism. And this has been very enriching for us. We offer training in the martial arts, traditional Eastern arts, that continues to be strong. We have mindful examinations, the warrior's exam, which you see a couple of versions of it here. And we have a variety of ways that we have brought contemplative pedagogy into how to evaluate and grade students. Our contemplative diversity work is very precious to us, and we'll continue working with that. And finally, mindful endings and graduations. Naropa graduations are iconic. Attending a Naropa graduation is unlike any graduation you go to. I can't explain what it's like, but one of our graduation speakers was Pema Chodron, who came because her granddaughter attended Naropa for 4 years, and she said that if she made it through Naropa for 4 years, she would definitely come and give the graduation address, and she did. But we often have students do brushstroke at graduation or do contemplative activities as part of their contemplative orals before graduation. So we have contemplative or mindful endings as well. So thank you, and we have time for a few questions. Yes.
So you mentioned it at the end again with the warrior examination, but I'd love to hear more both on the faculty level and on the undergraduate level of evaluating people's contemplative practice or the rigor of contemplative practice. It's not an easy thing to do.
And another person to talk to about this is Carol Clements, our dean of the college, who's here as well. We've had a long history of not grading people's practice, but grading their participation. And for example, in my syllabus workshop tomorrow, I'll be showing how the people who are doing my compassion course, they do the compassion meditation and then they reflect on a question, and I grade their reflection on 3 criteria. In terms of their participation, they're completing a certain number of sessions of the practice, their ability to describe the feeling they have in their experience, body, emotions, thoughts, when reflecting, and then their ability to critically reflect about that experience. So we have developed rubrics for how we grade, but we can't grade people's practice, and it's none of our business what happens in their actual practice.
And then also on the faculty level, you talked about it as an element of the promotion process.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
In the faculty promotion, you mentioned also assessing depth of people's practice. I mean, it sounded later when you were talking about it was just the pursuit of depth rather than actual resulting depth.
It's an ongoing thing about how do we evaluate faculty contemplative development. Mostly it's that they actually are going on retreat, that they're setting aside time to participate in contemplative activities, but we can't do any kind of qualitative evaluation of that. We ask specifically for them in their promotion papers to describe how that contemplative practice has shaped their teaching. We look for that kind of self-evaluation evidence. We do have faculty who, fulfill a lot of the criteria and they don't do much with that. So we have to talk with them about that, about what that means. Is this something that, and of course, if this is something that simply doesn't fit for them, then strong on the other things is important.
Thanks very much. That's very interesting.
Thank you. Yes.
Really loud. Oh, recording thing. I hate the recording
Yeah,
thing.
well, and I'm hearing challenged, so it's very helpful if you're
Okay.
talking to the
No,
mic.
yeah,
And for everybody, not the ice cream cone, but the karaoke works best with the microphone.
I've never been to karaoke. So
Okay.
I have a question about, and I came late, so I apologize for that, but what is Naropa doing in terms of science and education, you know, with very, I mean, basic science courses? Because, you know, from my perspective as a physician, and bringing together contemplative practice into the practice of medicine is something that's like key for
Extremely
me. And man,
important.
do we need it, so.
Yes, and I'd love it if Carol addressed this as well. We have never been strong on science. We do have scientists on our faculty who teach science courses and sort of basic scientific investigation and method. And in our psychology department, we also do things with how do you think in that kind of scientific way. But we have never had science as a...
Naropa pre-med.
No Naropa. If you want pre-med, you know, my son, for example, who, when my son was wanting to go to college, he looked around and he came to me and he said, Mom, you never told me that they don't meditate at these other schools. He said, I guess I'll go to Naropa. He always assumed that this was the norm. And so he went to Naropa and he developed a very strong interest in science. And he went off to do pre-med classes after. He ended up not doing all of that. But he feels strongly, you guys need to develop a much stronger, and certainly in the future, that would be a lovely thing to do. Do you have anything you wanted to add, Carol?
I can simply say that our students, because of our proximity to CU, we do have a consortium agreement so that students can actually take science courses through CU. What our students, though, have been asking, and increasingly we have to look at, is the way in which we're serving them around science. So it's in the works, particularly as we've developed a teacher training program, which we're rolling out. How we're handling the science at Naropa's got more of a spotlight. That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you have someone who would like to give us a few $1 million for that, we all would be
We'll
very
gladly
interested.
take it.
If I had somebody who'd like
Yeah.
to give you $1 million, I'd like this.
Yes.
Hi, so you mentioned the heritage practices, and I just wondered that after the 2014 takeover, if that was one of the issues that was raised, was that you should probably include and incorporate more of the African, Caribbean, Native American traditions. So I just wondered if you could speak more to that.
We've had, on the case council, we've had a lot of conversations about what does it mean to have heritage practices and what kind of white privilege is embedded in a heritage practice that we've done for so many years. And there are a couple of things that we've done. The heritage practices include a lot of different religious traditions. We've not had a lot of African traditions embedded in Naropa's heritage, but we're finding that more and more conversation about that, so that some of my African American colleagues are translating heritage practices into work with their ancestors, and that becomes an overt way. We have some marvelous conversations about traditions like the Naropa bow, which is Naropa's famous for its beginning and ending classes with a bow. And so one of my colleagues talks about how she really cannot bow to white people, and that she does not want us to be thinking that that's what she's doing. What she does is she visualizes her ancestors and she bows to them. So in every one of our classes, we're really unpacking some of the things that have to do with white privilege and how that has had in it a kind of message of white privilege. So how do we participate in the heritage in such a way that we feel included? And we find that this has been very enriching and broadening for us as a community. It goes on, and we have had an African religions course in our curriculum for a number of years, taught by an African American colleague, a dear friend, and sometimes it's very popular and sometimes it It's not enrolled. African drumming, however, has been core at Naropa for a long, long time. And our African drummer professors have been very open about the role of ancestors in their classes. So that has been part of our curriculum. Yes, Carolyn.
Taking it one step further, why don't you speak to what is the bow and what does that mean in the Naropa community?
Okay, from the beginning of Naropa, we developed a bow of hands on our thighs and just bringing ourselves into the present moment. It's a kind of act of bringing ourselves into the present moment. And then once we're here, connecting from the heart to everyone else who's there. So acknowledging being here myself, seeing I'm not here alone, I'm with a group of people in connection, in community. There's a lot of emphasis on community in the bow. And as we connect, will you please bow with me? So as we first bring ourselves to this moment, myself, and then connect with others. It's not a private, solitary thing. We connect, sort of quickly connect on eye contact, and then we bow together. And this has been an incredibly important community building experience for us throughout our history. And as time has gone on and as we've talked more openly and frankly about it, for example, my Orthodox Jewish colleague teaches in our department says, in Orthodox Judaism, you don't bow. So he shares then how he understands the bow, that he understands it not as bowing to an icon of some kind, but it's a community building activity. So the more we talk about the Naropa bow with each other, the more we find that this is something that we could, or some people don't feel comfortable bowing, so then we talk about that. So we're using Naropa's heritage these days as a kind of conversation about inclusion and exclusion and how can we join in. And if we can't join in, how can we alter the environment so that we can include you even if you don't want to bow? This has been incredibly big for Naropa because for decades we bowed with a kind of top-down, white authority person, Buddhist often, saying we're going to bow without really generating the conversation. And this has been a very big shift in our faculty and student culture. And hopefully, I'm oblivious to things, the luxury of obliviousness, as William Johnson talks about, that it's easy for me because as a person of privilege to completely miss lots of things. So learning from my students and from my colleagues has been incredibly helpful for understanding how much I fall into that privilege blindness. And so it's been a very powerful time for us as a university. Anyway, thank you very much.